And when I met my guru, I really felt loved unconditionally. And what happened was I opened, and then I became very attached to his form and to being near him and to looking at him and to touching him and to bringing him gifts and breakfast in bed, whatever, just like you do with your beloved. You want them to be happy as long as it includes you. Well, I'll be happiest with somebody else. Oh, wonderful, because I love you so much. See about unconditional love? See how quickly it gets you? But because of the particular game that my guru was playing with me, he kept throwing me out all the time. He'd only let me see him for a couple of minutes, and then he'd say, "Jiao, go. Split. Go somewhere else." And I, at first, got very offended. I mean, can you imagine if you fall in love with somebody, and then you cross the ocean bringing fruit and whatever you can bring that you could possibly offer to your beloved, and you've come this long way and you feel a mixture of righteousness and desire and everything, and he's all wrapped up with your enlightenment and everything, so you can't get there fast enough, and you get there and you kneel down and he looks at you and he pulls your beard, hits you on the head, asks you one question and says, "Jiao." You say, "Jiao." You know. He let other people stay around him and not me. So he obviously loved them more than he loved me. Okay? Terrible problem. I got to hate the other devotees so intensely. But then he took me through this trip, which most of you know that have read any of the stuff I've written. And I'm just going to take you through because it's so delicious as a teaching. Even if you've heard it, think of how many times I've heard it. This was in the early 70s when a number of people like Mira and Danny, and we were with Maharaj, Lama Surya Das. We were kept in the back of the temple ashram. We were paraded in the bus in the morning. We got there, he'd be sitting outside, we'd have darshan, we'd hang around him and love him, and he'd throw fruit at us. And you just couldn't get it. You were drunk with love, and everything he said to anybody applied to everybody. And then after about, 5 minutes or a half hour, he'd say, "Jiao," and he'd throw us all in the back, where we'd be fed. We were known as only useful for 5 things: drinking tea, gossiping, sleeping, eating, and moving about. That was our practice. So in the back of the ashram, that's all we do. And then late in the afternoon, we'd all be brought back just before the bus was leaving, have another time together, and then be thrown out. And in the course of the day, he'd call people up from the back. There was one woman who sang beautifully, so he'd call her up and say, "Sing," and she'd sing. It was like little performing animals, you know. You wind up and out come. We were the Westerners. You wind up and out you come. And so he had Indians coming, and they'd be hanging out, and he'd say, "You want to see a Westerner, perform?" And we'd be brought forth. And some of us were scholars, and we'd be scholarly, and some of us were pundits who could recite Hindu things, and some of us could sing Hindu kirtan. And he'd bring us forth, And I was like a professor from Harvard, and there I'd come. In fact, I'd been thrown out. It was irrelevant to Maharaji, So then one day he called me up, and I'd come, and each time you're getting called, you've been called out of this mass of, unworthy people. You've been chosen to go up and be worthy. And so you rush up because you realize this is going to be your chance to get the juice. This is it, And you run up and you kneel down and you look up. I mean, this is all a game. You understand. This is all forms. First, when I went to India, I thought, I'm not going to touch anybody's feet. What a bunch of, Now I couldn't do it fast enough. I used to try to grab one of his feet, and then it would go under the blanket quick, and I'd think I'm not pure enough. I mean, it was like it's a whole routine you play out. So I go up, and he'd look, and he'd say, "Ram Das, love everyone. I'd say, yes, Maharaj. He'd say, Jao. See, so you go back, and that was what you got that day. You'd sit there, love everyone. Boy, I don't love everyone. I should love everyone. The next day, he called me up. I got called up in 2 days running. Came up, and he leaned way down. He held my beard, and he said, Ramdas. Yeah, this is in Hindi. Ramdas. Okay. Ramdas. Ramdas. Okay. Ramdas, tell the truth. Yes, Maharaji. Jao. So I was left that day with what a liar I was. I decided I'd really tell the truth. Well, he kept doing this. Each day he'd alternate. It was either love everyone or tell the truth. And it took me about 4 or 5 days because of my density before I realized the peculiar predicament I found myself in. That he was giving me 2 contradictory instructions. Because the truth was I didn't love everyone. So I thought about which one shall I do? And I thought, you know what I always do is I love everyone, even if it's not the truth. I make believe I love them. I love you. Oh, yes, we love each other. Oh, it's okay, I love you. I thought maybe it'd be good to try telling the truth. That'll be refreshing. And as I looked at all my guru brothers, and said, I realized I hated them all. Because they all took me away from him. And I had spilled the beans about him in the first place with Be Here Now, and now I was set with all these unworthy, people that were hanging around taking his time. I mean, they were nice people, but I had a good reason. I mean, I just didn't hate them generally. I'd find reasons for each one. That one was too arrogant, and that one had, After a week or two, the truth was I found I didn't like anybody. I even had a sign on my door, do not enter. Okay? Now, at the same time, I was doing another sadhana, another practice, which was that Maharaji said, Ramdas should not touch money. Now, you can interpret that at many levels. Now I interpret that my mind shouldn't cling or fixate on money. That allows me to have a credit card. But in those days, I took it literally. I shouldn't touch money. So what I did was one of my friends, my Guru Bhai, would be a bag person. They'd carry my money. So we'd get on the bus, they'd pay my bus fare. See, that worked out fine until I got to hate them all. Now I was in a predicament because I had nobody who I didn't hate, who I hadn't alienated, to be my bag person. Now, from the hotel to the temple is 8 miles. So what I found was I got to the position where there was a day where everybody got on the bus and I had no money to get on the bus, so I had to walk. All the way to the temple, I walked knowing what fun they were all having at the temple. Because they got there in about half hour and it was going to be about 3 hours for me. It was through the backwoods. And so I was getting more and more angry. I was getting furious. And when I came over looking down on the temple, I saw them all laughing. And they were all hanging around Maharaji. And he has obviously spent much more time with them today than any other day. And I was full of loathing and hatred, and I hated myself and felt so impure to even walk into the temple. And I walked in, and by then, they had just, as I came down, they were all, had their lunches. They were sitting on a porch with leaf plates and their food. And I came in, and they might have been talking about me, I don't know, but one of the people who I especially despised came up with a leaf plate of food and offered it to me. And I took it and I threw it at him. See? I remember the moment very clearly. I mean, it was oh, ha, 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 ha. And I heard Maharaji from across the courtyard. Ramdas. 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 And I looked over at him, and at that moment, I hated him too, right? And I went across the courtyard pissed. I mean, I was really angry, and I sat down in front of him, and I looked up at him, and I was like, you know, I was so, my bones were aching. You know how that gets when you're really constricted. And he looks at me and says, something troubling you? I said, yeah. Yeah. What is it? I said, I hate all of them. And I said, and I hate myself. And he said, do you love me? And I looked at him, and it just fell apart. I opened and I started to sob, absolutely sob. I said, I love you. And I was sobbing, and he went and he sent for milk, and he was pouring milk down my throat, and he was patting me on the head, and I went through the whole catharsis and all of that. And then he came up to me, kind of nose to nose. He leaned over on his tucket, and he said, I told you to love everyone. I said, but you told me to tell the truth. And the truth is, I don't love everyone. And he leaned forward and he said to me, Ramdas, love everyone and tell the truth. At that moment, what I experienced were two things. First was I experienced a coffin in front of me, in which who I thought I was in the coffin. Who I thought I was somebody whose truth was that they didn't love everyone. And what he was describing to me was who I would be when I finished being who I thought I was. Can you hear that? Is that... Yeah. And the other thing was that at that moment I turned and I looked over at my fellow Guru Bhai, sisters and brothers, and I saw that at one level I had all this righteous indignation about them, but one little flip of consciousness, and I saw how incredibly beautiful each one of them was. And I loved them so deeply. Jiao. And that was the teaching. And I realized that since that time, for 20 years, I have been learning that teaching. I have been letting, and when I realize is that when I don't feel that love for another human being, I hear Maharaji saying, Ramdas, love everyone and tell the truth. Then he said to me afterwards, he said, Ramdas, give up anger, and I'll help you. He didn't say, as I would say as a psychotherapist, let's work through your anger. He said, give up anger. And I took that as a spiritual charge, as a message. And that when I experienced anger, instead of trying to figure out why I experienced the anger, which kind of investing it, I would just start to do breathing and Ram and start to go into devotional practice and just let go, even though the same anger would come back up again. At one point, I was studying with a very beautiful man named Anagorika Munindra. He was a Theravadan Buddhist teacher. Lovely, lovely man. And I came to him one time, and I said to him, Munindraji, I am so angry, because I had so much anger in me for so many years, and keeping grudges, those deep things that always cut you up. Every time that person's conscious, the thought of that person goes through your head, you constrict. And he said, Ram Dass, don't hold on to it. It's just old karma running off. Your anger is just old karma running off. And one of the traps that I saw that I was caught in was the trap of righteousness that I used to justify my anger. But I saw that love freed me back into the ocean, and that anger didn't, and that I would rather be free than right. And that's a scary and big one. And that if somebody does an abhorrent action, I have to cultivate the capacity to, as Kabir said, and Maharaj used to quote, Kabir said, do what you do with another being, but never put them out of your heart. Do what you do with another being, but never put them out of your heart. That is a total prescription for social activists. Oppose, stand up, defy, confront. Do what you do with another person. You stop their action. You may have to imprison that person so that they don't hurt other people. You do what you must do, but you do it without closing your heart. And I don't mean the fraudulent, I didn't close my heart. I mean really the quality of do what you do, but do it always in the presence of the beloved.